If you're Google sitting on top of your search billions, suddenly you've got these other companies that, for example, OpenAI announced yesterday it's going to have a new search engine.
There'll be a number of these companies go by the wall and some big falls in stock prices, and people will lose quite a lot of money. But in the end, you will emerge out of it some big, powerful contenders who are dominating this industry. So welcome back. Lots of speculation that this is a tech bubble. This is the 2025 equivalent of the dot-com boom and bust, which we saw, around the millennium, 99, 2000, 2001, where you had a lot of tech companies setting themselves up, not making money, big rise in the stock valuations, and then a collapse, a bunch of firms going bankrupt. And you've seen a huge rise in valuations, huge capital going into the stocks of, I think, about 10 American tech companies, mostly, not all, but mostly loss-making, huge rise in the stock market. And there was a piece in The Economist by the former chief economist at the IMF called Geeta Gopinath on the crash that could torch 35 trillion of wealth. The world has become dangerously dependent on American stocks, she says, and if the bubble bursts, this will be a catastrophe for the global economy in the next year. So is this a massive investment and a massive capitalization in rising valuations of loss-making companies powering the American, but, let's be honest, international investors' apparent wealth? And is this bubble going to burst?
So I think you have to sort of take one step back. So first of all, something remarkable is happening. Artificial intelligence, long talked about actually in theory over like several hundred years. And there's a famous thing called the Alan Turing test, which Alan Turing, the great code breaker in the Second World War, set up in the middle of the 20th century about how you could test whether genuine artificial intelligence had been created. So it's been long talked about, and there's been a lot of work on this over the recent decades. When I was Chancellor of the Exchequer, there was only one company that I was contacted by who said, why don't you come in and do a whole day's work experience here? Come and spend time with this company. And this is not the same as going on a kind of factory visit in a hard hat or going to a bakery on a kind of TV visit. This was genuinely come in and just listen to what we do. And that company was DeepMind, the artificial intelligence company, which I spent a day with as Chancellor before it was well known. And it's now part of Google and a big part of their efforts. And the two co-founders of that, Demis Hassabis and Mustafa Suleyman, run the two big operations now at Google and Microsoft. And Demis got the Nobel Prize last year. So artificial intelligence has been around as an idea for some time, and people have been talking about it as a sort of serious economic force for 20 years. But what has happened in the last 3 or 4 years, very recently, has been an absolute explosion in the valuation of some new AI companies. So you've got some original listed companies on the stock market, so-called Magnificent Seven, like Microsoft, Apple, Google, Meta, all very well known to people. More recently, Nvidia, the company that provides the chips for these companies. And these companies all have over $1 trillion valuations in the stock market. I mean, to put that in some context, that's basically each one of them, certainly when you get to the bigger ones, is bigger than the entire FTSE put together in Britain. Take all the British companies put together. And one of these companies can be bigger than all of them. And they are very profitable, and they are generating huge returns for the taxpayer, but for their investors. But they are also plowing money into AI, and they're building these incredibly expensive data centers, which require huge amounts of energy as well. So they're having to build nuclear power plants and other forms of energy to power them. But behind them, snapping at their heels, are these new private companies, of which two of the most famous are Anthropic, which actually we should note that Rishi Sunak in the last couple of weeks was announced as he's going to have a role advising them, as well as his other advisory jobs at Goldman Sachs and Microsoft. And his
new column in the Sunday Times.
And new column in the Sunday Times. and OpenAI is the other one. And these are private companies. So then you can't just sort of look at the stock market and say, well, how much are they worth? But the estimation is that OpenAI is now worth £500 billion. That is the most expensive private company in history. And it was only created in 2015, and its valuation has rocketed in recent years. And so you then have this question of like, is it worth it? Is that really the value of the company? And if it isn't, this is the kind of the argument about it being a bubble. It's all kind of supporting itself because Nvidia is lending money to OpenAI to buy Nvidia chips. OpenAI is a big part of the Microsoft valuation because Microsoft has a share in OpenAI. And if there's a kind of the emperor's got no clothes moment happens, then all of these valuations will collapse. And these are at the heart now of what is driving the American stock market, and therefore all these pension funds and personal investors all around the world who have done pretty well in recent years. But I'm going to call it. I just don't think it is yet a bubble because I think if you look at the fundamentals, the opportunity here for these companies is so enormous. The potential profits that lie out there are so huge. The new markets they might create are so vast that you can absolutely justify why people think they are worth what they are worth. And it is a bit reminiscent to the conversations I used to have when I first became an MP with people saying, I don't know, this Facebook, this Google, they're not making any money. Aren't they ever going to be worth anything? And then there was a dot-com crash in 2000, and that was the end of tech. And now these companies are, as I say, bigger than all the rest of the companies put together, kind of, at the top of these stock markets. So I think that you can say the same about these new tech companies. And by the way, the fact they're new and the existing companies have been unable to sort of stop these insurgents also puts to bed the myth that there's now a monopoly at the top of American capitalism and new companies can't emerge.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you and say that I think there is certainly bubble-like activity going on, although I'm very unconvinced by the former chief economist at the IMF that this is suddenly going to lead to some huge global destroying crash. Before I tell you what I think, we asked ChatGPT whether it thinks that there is an AI bubble going on. And here's what it told us.
Hi ChatGPT, I have a question for you. You might have seen the valuations for lots of AI stocks, so I want to know what you think. Is there a bubble in AI valuations?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people are debating that. On one side, the valuations of certain AI companies have skyrocketed, sometimes based on future potential rather than current earnings, which can definitely resemble a bubble. On the flip side, AI is also creating real groundbreaking changes in industries, so there's a strong foundation as well. It's kind of a complex landscape, and it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out over time.
So I thought ChatGPT there was agreeing with me, but I think it was simply saying, yeah, what a good question, and ended up sitting on the fence. But here is what I think is going
But by
on.
the way, isn't it amazing? I mean, that voice is computer generated voice.
Yeah.
Very naturalistic, very
Yeah, but
human.
it didn't say much though, did it? Here is my interpretation. As you say, this is more than simply new startups who aren't making money. This is massive investment from a number of companies who are already proven money makers with big track records, whether that's kind of Elon Musk and Tesla or Microsoft or Google or whatever. Secondly, the investment is real. It's having a real impact upon growth in America at the moment. And it may well be these huge investments in these data processing centers that they may turn out to have big productivity effects. I kind of think they will, and that many of them will turn out to be good investments. But I think the reason why it's a bubble is there's no doubt there's a whole bunch of people doing this in the hope of returns, and a bunch of them are going to get it wrong, and a bunch of them are not going to get the returns fast enough for the market. And at a certain point, there'll be write downs and losses and companies crashing. But the question is, what emerges at the end? If it's a bubble which bursts, then you end up with nothing. I think it's much more likely what will happen is there'll be a number of these companies go by the wall and some big falls in stock prices, and people will lose quite a lot of money. But in the end, you will emerge out of it some big, powerful contenders who are dominating this industry. I think the right way to think about it is, it's like musical chairs, and you want to be the person still in the game at the end, but you have to keep dancing. It's like there's a lake, and I've got a coffee shop by the lake, and suddenly I realise this lake is about to become massively popular. And so what do I do? Do I just wait and see whether a whole bunch of other people come in and set up coffee shops? Actually, the rational thing to do is to myself build 5 more coffee shops in my name with my money all the way round the lake, at different corners of the plot, because I'm going to squeeze out the competition. I'm going to make sure that when this lake becomes really popular, it's my shops who get the custom. And it may well be a bit loss making for me. And it may be that I lose some money on 2 or 3 of them. But if I'm still there standing when the music stops and others failed or came along and never made it, I'm the one who dominates. And we've discussed this before on this podcast about the AI companies, and the big AI companies, they quite like government regulation. They don't like competition policy. They'll have been rather pleased to see the British government sounding very anti-competition policy earlier in the year, because what they want is to try to make sure that these small arriving upstarts are not the ones who prevail. The big guys want to prevail, and they're willing to spend quite a lot of money and maybe make some quite big losses along the way. Now, that may be wrong, what I said. It may be there's no productivity gains, in which case it will all be wiped out. It will be a bubble. But even if that doesn't happen, and even if you have some big guys who emerge at the end strong and powerful, there's going to be loads of casualties along the way and lots of wasted money. And I think the thing government has to remember is that you want to make sure that you aren't de facto, by listening to these big companies, making it easy for the strong and the powerful to dominate a market and stop the new guys having a chance. And so far, that's not been the way it's worked out with stock market valuations. As you said, lots of the new guys have been getting the run of the market. But unless they get a fair run at the opportunity when it comes to the actual business, you could have massive tech consolidation and massive tech a kind of power, which comes through this bursting of bubble-like behaviour across this market. So that's why I think there's some bubble stuff going on.
Yeah, I think, hold on, I would draw a distinction between a bubble in, for example, tulips in Amsterdam, where suddenly everyone goes, this fundamentally, like, these tulips are not worth what we're paying for, or this South Sea company stock is not worth what we're paying for, or even potentially in gold, right, which has just seen a big drop in its price, having gone up and up recently. There's a sort of, people call out the kind of intrinsic value of the gold. What I think you're talking about is something different, which is there's clearly a massive transformation going on in industry, created by AI. So, it is disrupting legal services, accountancy, consultancy, banking, financial services, healthcare. You can imagine brand new legal firms emerging that, put the other legal firms out of business because they're based on AI work and so on. And so there will be winners and losers. It's a period of massive creative destruction in which you might well back the loser, but there will be big winners as well. And even among the big tech companies, it's not really clear who the winners are going to be. They may be huge and they may feel like they've got moats, as you say, or felt like they've got moats. But if you're Google sitting on top of your search billions, suddenly you've got these other companies that, for example, OpenAI announced yesterday it's going to have a new search engine. If you're Microsoft, has been dominating in software, well, who else is going to come along with new software provision? And you're very dependent now on your relationship with OpenAI. I mean, all of these things are really interesting. And at the moment, they're all benefiting. Where I agree with you is, like, they can't all win and there will be losers. Not sure that's the same as a bubble. It's just a period of big churn in which there are going to be some spectacular winners and therefore some spectacular losers as well.
But I think it's more than that, because at the moment, nobody has information and nobody wants to be left out. So people are piling in, hoping they're backing the winners. And what that does is it pushes up valuations across the board. And the bubble is that sort of sense of kind of the exuberance pushing up everybody's prices. And at a certain point, there's going to be some setbacks. And when the setbacks happen, those companies will go to the wall and collapse, and people will be bankrupted by the collapse of their share price. But everybody else will take a hit. And in the end, as that bubble-like behavior unwinds, the question is, where are we left? And I think most people would say they think these stock prices are currently inflated, but they don't think it's going to crash to nothing because it's real. So, but everybody at some point will take a hit. But who is going to be the guys who do well and the guys who are going to lose? And nobody kind of knows. And so at the moment, it's all a bit bubbly and it's all a bit exuberant, but it's not based upon nothing. It's not a Ponzi scheme. It's not made up. It's not like the dot-com bubble, which turned out to be kind of much more made up at the beginning of the millennium. I think it was kind of later that you saw the real increases in valuation. But so is it a bubble which is going to crash, which means there's going to be a 35 trillion wiped up the stock market? I don't think so. That's why I don't think it is simply a bubble which will burst. But I think there is a lot of bubble-like behavior going on here. And in the end, there will be a market correction, which will reduce these stock prices across the piece. But within that, there'll be some big winners and some big losers. And I think what public policy has to do is to try to make sure, we want some of the big winners to be in Britain or employing people in Britain. But we also want to make sure that this is a global market where the best ideas win rather than simply the people with the best lobbying organisations who can afford to, I don't know, employ Nick Clegg or whatever. I threw that one in so that everybody can say, oh God, he keeps going on about Nick Clegg. I'm sure Nick Clegg will do really well out of it, and good on him.
Yes, I think he already has, but he'll be touched by your concern. And I agree with you. We could definitely do with some of this exuberance in the UK right now.
We definitely could.
I'm feeling it a bit here on my trip to San Francisco.